welcome to The Heart of It, where we talk all things family life from a Christ-centered and Orthodox perspective. I'm Clara Bertan, and I'm so excited to have with us Dr. Christina Salama. Welcome, Christina.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I feel excitement already. That's good.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, and I'm happy to have you. And Christina, you're a clinical licensed psychologist. You work primarily with Christian women, working with anxiety. You also have a particular interest in maternal health and well-being. So that's really awesome. And I think connects to a part of our conversation today as well. And our topic for today is preparing for parenthood, which I think is a really fun and exciting topic, you know, beyond getting the crib ready and the car seat and all the logistical pieces. What does it mean for us to prepare our minds, our hearts, spiritually, relationally? And so I'm really excited to delve into today's content. But maybe before we get to some of our questions, I was wondering if you do a fun would you rather question with us.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So if you had the choice, would you rather be slightly overdressed, like everywhere you go, or always slightly underdressed?
Definitely slightly overdressed.
Okay.
I think that's my go-to, honestly.
Oh, okay.
Is
Yeah.
to be slightly. I would rather. I think it's a reflection of my brand, who I am. And
Yeah. I also think the dread of being like underdressed is much worse than going somewhere slightly overdressed.
yeah, because it's embarrassing. And then we overthink it. And then you're like, wait, should I? I guess the overthinking can go both ways.
Sure. That is true. Yeah. I'm with you. I think it makes a little sense to maybe present your best foot forward.
I think especially culturally.
Okay. I love it. Okay. So let's then dive into our content for today. So what does it mean for us to prepare for that journey of parenthood? And, you know, even if you already are a parent, I think there's some elements of this that I think are still helpful, but particularly for a couple that is beginning to think about, you know, what it means to be intentional about that calling. Before you yourself became a parent, I'm curious, maybe if you had any misconceptions about what it would be like to be a parent?
Yes. Okay. So a couple things. That was a really loaded question. I can take it a couple different directions. So misconceptions, to stay true to that, would be for me and myself. I knew that I would love being a mom. It's actually something that I've wanted since I was a teenager, and something that I've been very prayerful for. And actually, when my niece was born, like 9 years ago now, I felt such a strong bond and connection to her. So I think being her auntie has been really helpful in the transition to being a mom. But when you become an actual parent, there are things that you just don't consider, or you are taking yourself as a wife, as a friend, as a daughter, as a sister, and thinking that it's automatically going to apply copy paste into being a mom. So, for example, I had worked full time for as long as I can remember since I got licensed as a psychologist. And loved my work. I was a child and adolescent psychologist for a very long time. And then went on maternity leave, welcomed my son into the world, absolutely loved the bonding time with him. And then come time to go back to work, I loved my work and I loved my son. And I felt almost torn in two different directions. And so for me, if you had asked me before I had my child, are you going back to work? I'd say, absolutely. What are you talking about? Of course I'd go back to work. I have to work financially. I want to. I work too hard at school to not work. And so I eventually made the decision about when Daniel turned 1, that I am going to pivot and I am no longer going to work full time, since I felt it a calling on my heart to really lean into the ministry of motherhood. And I recognize that not everyone has that luxury. Not everyone has that blessing. But my husband was very, very supportive of that. And that has since been able to allow me to grow my practice. But that was a huge misconception. I thought I'm going to work full time for as long as I can, you know, till I'm 65. Another misconception that I had, which is actually really near and dear to my heart, I thought that as soon as I found out I was pregnant, that I would be bonded to the child. And I'd be like, yes, I can't wait. And it was more like, oh my gosh, I'm so sick. This is so miserable. This is going to be like this for the rest of my life. I'm so tired. What am I signing up for? This is something I've prayed for and I've wanted so badly. And this is not what I expected. And going through my pregnancy, I remember thinking like, is it weird to be disconnected from the fetus that's inside of me? Like, I know I love this little thing. And that was a huge misconception. And I think there was so much self-judgment and so much difficulty navigating those feelings and not really having an outlet to appropriately talk about it. You talk about it, oh, you'll be fine when the baby comes. Sure, I might be fine when the baby comes, but what about now? And what if I'm not bonded? And I remember talking to a girlfriend and she was telling me, you know, with my second kid, I was not bonded until 3-4 weeks later. So it's okay that if you're not bonded. So that was a huge misconception that I had pre-parenting / parenting. When we had a surprise gender, we didn't know what he was going to be. So when he was born, like it's a boy, I was like, oh my gosh, I saw him. My heart melted. I felt instantaneously bonded. And I'm like, this is my everything. I love this human with every fiber of my being. And I think being gentle with any of the misconceptions that we have along the way is okay. It's okay. Being gentle, receiving that, and working through it. Don't dismiss it. Work through it. Lean into it.
Yeah. Oh, and what I'm hearing you say is maybe there's like some of the plans that we have. There's a way that we think is going to play out, either from like our own desire of how we want it to play out, or just how we've seen other people maybe in their journey into parenthood. And then some of the things that you're speaking to in terms of like, what does it look like to then connect to this little human, this precious life, and all the different things that can kind of come at us in those first initial weeks and months into parenthood. And I'm curious if there's anything that surprised you maybe about yourself, like things that you didn't know about yourself as then you kind of entered into that role of motherhood.
Yes. And if I can just comment and actually kind of bring it to something that you just said, you said kind of in those few weeks. When my son was born, he was severely jaundiced and had to be put into an incubator for the first week of his life, which as a mother, I did not know, but as mothers now, we know the first couple days is pivotal for that bonding experience. You're trying to learn how to nurse. You're trying to learn how to change a diaper. You're trying to decipher all the different screams and yells and sounds and movements and reflexes. And what was really, what I knew of myself to be true was that I was really resilient. What surprised me about myself was that I had so much room to grow in the area of resilience. I was upset with myself that I hadn't considered, I consider, my husband and I consider ourselves very purposeful, very intentional, very proactive with preparing. And so, sure, we had prepared all the physical things. We had prepared our hearts and our minds that were, so we thought. And the first few days rocked our world. We had expected to be discharged 2 days after. And we were discharged nearly a week after baby was born. And I remember it was actually my birthday during that time, and my family had called to FaceTime me, and I was just bawling. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish my baby was here. But my dad told me something, and, you know, I might get emotional, which is absolutely okay because it just demonstrates the weight of parenthood and what I learned about myself. My dad told me, your son is a borrowed gift. Borrowing him from the Lord. He gave him to you. And you're going to do your best to take care of him until you give him back. And that just shifted my perspective to a direction that I did not anticipate. But it was so helpful to hear that, because we want to do right by our children because that is honorable to the Lord. We are saying, Lord, we acknowledge what you've given us, and we will do our best to prepare him for your kingdom. So I learned a lot about myself in that week. And I think as every day and week goes by as a mom, I'm learning more and more, and we continue to be humbled during that process.
Well, and I so appreciate what you are sharing, Christina, because that weight of just what it means to be entrusted as you're sharing with something so precious, not just to you, but to God, right? And that was the beginning of the journey for you, and that there were some elements of that you could not prepare for as much as you wanted to have a sense of preparing for, a wide range of things. And I have friends and people in my life that have had those curveballs thrown at them. And, what does it look like as you're sharing to learn something about yourself, to learn what you don't know yet about yourself? It's such a gift as you're sharing. And so then how do we, as individuals who have yet to receive that gift, how do we begin in terms of our preparation of inviting God into that process? Because I'm hearing that was a big lesson for you. So how can we then do that invitation piece first, almost?
Being a friend with the Lord is a pivotal part of that. So if you think of, a friend that you have that you enjoy their company, and you say, hey, come over. And it's just an easy, hey, come over, versus, maybe there's an acquaintance and you're like, do I know them well enough to invite them over? So that relationship with the Lord, I believe, is something that starts from our childhood. We grow in prayer. We grow in our culture, in the church, in Sunday school. Ideally, we would have edifying friendships that we can connect with. And so I see it almost as Christ is with us every single step of the way. And every morning when we wake up, we put on the armor of God and we pray, Lord, you guide my steps. So it's not such an overt invitation. It's something that I know Christ is with me. I am his child, and he has walked alongside me in the difficulties. He saved me from, a hardship and tribulation. And even if I do face hardship and tribulation, I know he is there. His grace is there every single step of the way. And to honor your question, you said people who have yet to receive this gift, being very intentional to know that he spoils us with gifts all along the way that are not limited to family and what that looks like. We are overcome with his love and mercy through work, through service, through prayer. And I want to visit the service piece. Serving others is one of the biggest gifts that we can see. Sure, a mom constantly serving others, you have that blessing, but visiting the elderly, visiting the widows, visiting the poor, going to soup kitchens, whatever service may look like, even if it's just helping someone on Facebook Marketplace who just, will take anything, will take food, will take a prayer, and being faithful in the least.
Then how do we prepare, if I'm thinking of a couple who's getting ready to prayerfully enter into this journey, how does a couple maybe practically think about, whether they're ready to, is that ever really even a question? Like, can you be ready to enter into parenthood? Are you ever really ready? And what then should a couple do to practically prepare?
Sure. I can't answer for myself. I don't know that I would have ever been ready. I think emotionally I was very ready to be a mom. Maritally, I know that when my husband and I were courting, we had talked about a timeline. What does a timeline even mean?
Yeah. The man has plans, but the Lord directs his steps.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I told my husband, it's really important for me, I don't care 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. I care that we can establish ourselves as a couple unit before we take on this new role. And for me, that meant really excelling in our communication. And I love to share this. My husband and I did counseling about a year into our marriage, couples counseling, because we both have the value of being the best that we can be. And we like to, this is not a word and I'm just making it up. We like to outbest the other. I don't know what the word is right now, but we love to be the best version of ourselves, for each other, for the Lord. And really strengthening our communication has been a pivotal part of building ourselves as a couple unit. When you become parents and you're in the throes of diapers and crib and the monitor stopped working and are we using formula or are we just nursing? But the kid doesn't latch, and what do you do? When the focus is that, the relationship inevitably is not talked about. And because the baby is talked about, it's still there. It's just not actively being worked on unless one is intentional. So what I would tell couples is make sure that your communication's on point. Make sure that you know how to identify your feelings, to express yourself, not only for yourself, not only for your spouse, but also to model this eventually to your child. I think also having an idea of who your support system is going to be. We are very fortunate to have grandparents around. I live next door to my sister, but at the cost of us moving 6 weeks after my son was born. So we moved from, a condo that fit us comfortably as a couple to then a home where we could take our son. But we're now 2 miles away from my mother-in-law, a couple miles away from my mom and my brother. And are so fortunate. And I understand not everyone is as fortunate to have family around. And yes, we may not have family, but who is our support system? Is it going to be a friend? Is it going to be a nanny? Are we going to hire a crew to help manage and organize our house? Are we going to have, daycare, nannies, etc., which are all part of the support network? Really identifying who that is, and as much as possible being on the same page. And, you might ask, Christina, well, what if they're not on the same page, which, does happen. I would really encourage the couples to share as much as they can and understand, be curious, demonstrate curiosity towards your partner and what they are going through. So you could lean into that and say, oh, you're working so hard because you could provide financially, not because you hate us and don't want to be around us. So, that's just a silly example, but really fully understanding your partner is going to be, I guess that's part of the communication. Sure, yeah. But it is going to change the trajectory of the relationship. Not even when things get tough, it just will change the trajectory.
Well, and I'm hearing you say that communication piece is key, identifying if there are areas where you're approaching things differently, not because, there's anything even problematic about that, but it's just perhaps what your ideas, coming into parenting and what you think or expect of the role might be. And, recognizing that in some ways adding an additional element to that doesn't make anything easier. It's just asking for a lot more intentionality than in how we approach those things. Because sometimes I come across this idea of everything's going to be okay. Like once the baby comes, you figure it out. And certainly from the day-to-day stuff, but some of the bigger things, I think it's only exacerbated if we're not on the same page earlier on. And so I'm curious then, what habits or rhythms would be helpful for that couple that is communicating well or trying as best as they can, is intentional about those areas of differences or different approach? What habits or rhythms can they build into their life now that will make it a little bit easier, a little bit more peaceful when the baby comes?
Sure. This is so loaded because when I think of rhythms, I think a little bit of self-care and discipline. What already exists that is allowing my life to move forward at a comfortable pace. Of course, when you add a baby into the mix, I think comfortable pace no longer becomes comfortable pace. It just becomes chaos. One of the rhythms, if you will, or disciplines is preparation. one piece of that is talking about the division of labor. Who's going to be purchasing all the essentials for the baby? Who's going to be in charge of making sure the car seat is installed correctly? Who's going to make sure that we have enough financial reserve to afford some baby-related expenses? Who is going to set the boundary, and how is the boundary going to be set when someone wants to come over and we haven't slept in 3 days? So that's one discipline I really want to lean into, is the ability to recognize that boundaries are helpful and not hurtful. Oftentimes in our culture, boundaries are seen as some sort of rejection or dismissal of the other party, when in reality, a boundary is made to protect both parties, are made to highlight the importance of a healthy lifestyle. Now, this could be traditional or non-traditional, but asking, folks to mask up when they come visit the baby, or baby, like I mentioned earlier, was born in December, right in the thick of flu season, around the holidays, lots of people are seeing each other. And I did ask folks to put a mask on. I wrote something before I had the baby because I just didn't know what my mental capacity would be afterwards. Mm-hmm. And I also talked with my husband, like, hey, how are we going to navigate the sleepless nights? Mm-hmm. And, that was a good rhythm that we had in place before. We both got our sleep. Afterwards, there's no guarantee of that. And we got comfortable doing the uncomfortable, which was expressing our needs, not only to each other, but to our friends and family who came over. So just as a personal example, a friend said, hey, I want to come see your baby. And I said, sure, come see my baby. Not only are you going to come see him, you're going to come hold him while I sleep. She happily did it, thankfully, God bless good friends. And she did that a few times so that we could sleep. And then I was like, hey, that was really nice. We need someone we trust. We need to have some milk ready. And maybe we need some food too. So, hey, come over, hold baby, bring food with you. And, I didn't always sleep when they came over, but it was helpful to have them. And I say hold baby because my baby did not like to go in the bassinet. He did not like to be left. He liked to be held. And if I could hold him all day, every day, I would. Not very practical. But I would like to do things around the house, like fold my laundry, sanitize, pump parts, God knows what we have going on.
All the fun things.
Yeah. And some people are comfortable asking other people to do that, visitors. I prefer to do that to myself as long as I knew baby was taken care of. But really, to go back to your question, the discipline or the rhythm of rest, boundaries, communication, I think are some of the essentials.
Yeah. I love that. Rest, boundaries, communicating, and how all those things actually feed into each other as well. And even as you're sharing that, Christina, like I think of what it means, for one partner, if there's one person in the couple who maybe feels more strongly about something, and as that communication piece is so critical, and we're expressing our heart and our need behind that there is an accommodation to that, because in some ways, like, we don't come in with like an identical blueprint of what is important to us or what matters to us, but are we communicating those things? Are we asking the questions that bring to the surface why that matters to us, and then asking for those accommodations along the way, I think is really key and critical, and hard to know if you're not checking in with yourself, like what matters to you in that process.
Sure. If I could, I think you articulated that so beautifully. And what you're speaking to are values. What are the core values that are guiding us? For example, one of my core values is efficiency. Everything must be done efficiently, correctly, in order, quickly.
Come over to our house.
Happily. Happily. And while that might not match my spouse or my parents' value, I need to be able to express that while also understanding not everyone's is going to match, but they can get along. The values can get along. And for me, it's really important to live a value-aligned life. So if something is really important and someone else is doing it differently, I'm going to share my piece. I'm going to, because that's a need that I have. I'm going to share that need and also make space for what they have on the other side.
And so as you're talking about what it means to prepare in that communication piece and being in touch or attuned to your values, what matters to you. And I think some of that also like comes up as situations present themselves. Like sometimes you don't know what matters to you until you're kind of confronted with having to make a choice. But are there some areas you feel like, I wish I would have been a little bit more prepared for parenthood or the journey of parenthood, or I probably over prepared for this and this didn't matter as much? Like, I'm curious looking back if you can kind of sort through that a little bit differently now.
Yeah, I would say we were a mix of over prepared and not prepared at all.
I think that's a perfect. Yeah, I will echo that statement. Yes.
I think part of what complicated that mix for us is that we were in the middle of staging our house to be sold, packing our house to move, and we didn't know what the sex of the baby would be. So even like that delayed some of the preparation. Like I had some girl clothes, some boy clothes, some gender neutral clothes, which, can be solved within the matter of days. It's not a huge deal.
But it's still something on your mind that you need to process. Yeah.
Yes. But I think preparing, you said on your mind, and that really sparked this thought, preparing for the mental load that you don't even know about yet. So many variables will come up. You don't know what these variables are. We tried to control as many variables that we could control for, but of course, the plan's out the window. One piece that maybe I myself struggled with, I have seen friends struggle with, is the nursing piece. And I remember, later on, I got connected with a lactation consultant after I had my baby. And I asked her, why are there so many resources for breastfeeding? Doesn't seem to be resources for this or that or the other thing. She said, breastfeeding is probably the hardest thing that you're going to do postpartum. I said, oh, okay. Makes sense why I'm seeing you. But I think knowing ahead of time that was going to be a challenge could have alleviated stress around the feeding process. Another thing I had prepared to exclusively nurse and pump, give breast milk as the primary source of nutrition. But since my son was in the incubator and was very aggressive with the timeline he could be out of the incubator, I remember a nurse telling me, listen, we don't have time for you to sit here and listen, like to learn how to breastfeed. You have 30 minutes to feed him, change him, bond with him, and put him back.
Wow.
30 minutes? Habibi, I'm a new mom. It takes me like 45 minutes to change a diaper. I don't know.
Just to latch on. Yeah.
So we were not even encouraged. We were told we had to give formula, which, it's a personal discussion. And my husband had looked into formulas and we wanted to give organic formula and, certain type, but you're limited to what they have in the hospital for liability reasons, et cetera, things that you don't even think about ahead of time. But I wish I would have been more prepared to the possibility that things would look very differently, and just preparing for the mental load that I don't know what's going to come up, but I know a lot's going to come up, and I'm going to navigate it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. And I think what you're speaking to also is the expectation that we can put on ourselves as new parents, and some of those plans and what our heart and our intention, and some of it is good and valid, and some of it is pressure, I think, just for the sake of, an ideal that maybe we have put in our mind. And and I'm curious, how do we be honest with ourselves a little bit and relax, as far as maybe some things that are not going according to plan and how to pivot and still put our faith and our hope and our trust in God and, not kill our partner in the process. Like, I'm curious about those curveballs more specifically, because those are the things that you really can't plan for, but your heart posture maybe can be planned for, maybe a little bit, if I'm getting it right.
Yes. Being honest with yourself with what your capacity is, recognizing what resources exist that can aid you in some of those needs. And I think it's also important to note if any of what is surfacing is related to postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD. Is there a mental health component that can explain some of the difficulty with adjustment? I bring this up because I know that this is something that's not often talked about culturally, not often talked about within the postpartum realm. You hear things like, oh, she has postpartum. Well, she has postpartum doesn't really mean anything. It means she's in the time after.
She had a baby.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But what is it that she's struggling with? Is she crying out of nowhere? Is she cleaning the house up and down because she has a compulsion to do so? Is she anxious, fearing that bad things are befalling her child, having to check the bassinet frequently? Is baby still breathing? On some level, the very beginning, these things can be normalized. Should these things continue, I believe that the resources that I just talked about are things that need to be utilized and referenced frequently.
Yeah.
I want to speak to reducing the shame and stigma around getting a professional opinion to walk alongside you. There are so many professionals out there that view their career as a service to others, that genuinely just want to see others thrive and do well. It's not about a business or a paycheck for them. It's out of love and service and care in their hearts. So forgive me if I deviated from the question that you had, but that's how I would look at navigating some of these things.
Yeah, and I think what you're bringing up is so important, because we have a hope and a prayer, and some of it is rooted in so many good things. But the pieces that we don't talk about that, sometimes come out of nowhere for us because our preparation feels a little different, in terms of like what then actually is the reality for us. And that was one of the pieces for me that kind of took me by surprise, was how lonely some elements of parenting, of breastfeeding, of being a new mom would be, even when you're surrounded by quite a lot of love and so many people that want to support you. But then perhaps some of the very real pressure of like, if you really are breastfeeding, like it does depend on you. There's kind of no other alternative unless you're exploring other alternatives. So that loneliness piece, the piece of you can still be really grateful and in love with this child and still balancing some really hard feelings on the side. Like, we don't want to dismiss that. And we want to open up the conversation for parents to be aware that, that is something that could potentially be a part of your parenting journey. I'm hearing you say no shame. Invite somebody who loves you, cares for you, whether professionally or spiritually, in that process. And I think that's so important and worth noting a million times.
Yes.
Million times over. And so then, Christina, maybe walk us through with like some specific conversations then that maybe couples should be intentional about having. And I'm especially thinking of like, here we are, like as moms, maybe we're thinking about the baby. I'm not saying dad's not thinking about the baby, but like we're preparing a little bit differently, but sometimes it could almost exclude our partner a little bit. So how do we bring in moms, dads, a couple that's actually having these thoughtful conversations beforehand? And what are those specific topics? You touched on some of them a little bit, but what are some of the ones we don't want to miss prior to the baby coming into our life?
Yeah, so I'm going to take this more from a relational perspective rather than necessarily a parenting perspective because it does bleed into it. There is, sorry to be all therapist-y right now. There is an intervention from the Gottman method called the State of the Union. And this is essentially a weekly connection between the couple, one of the rhythms, if you will, that could be established pre-baby, also carried post-baby. And I'll walk you through some of the things that are in this State of the Union that will help. I don't want to say, create a foolproof, situation, because it really is up to how faithful the couple is following this, how faithful the couple is in their spirituality and, navigating challenges all together. But the different points that are in the State of the Union, one is each taking turns. How have I shown you any sort of love and appreciation this week? So, for example, the first question is, what have you loved or appreciated about your partner? I love that you picked up Wingstop for me, knowing that it was my favorite meal after, the resurrection feast. I appreciate that you put the groceries away without me having to ask. That really took a load off of me. So sharing your appreciation for your partner. Then transitioning to the question of each partner answering, what is going well in the relationship? I feel like our communication has been really solid. I've shared with you when I'm going to be working late. I've shared with you that my mom's going to be coming over. Whatever is going well. The next is talking about recent or perpetual issues. So has there been any recent issue that's come up that we need to dialogue about? Any perpetual issue? And this term, perpetual issue, is a term coined by John Gottman, who is a relationship psychologist. He's, one of the most common couples therapy techniques is by John Gottman. And 69% of issues that exist in marriages are perpetual, meaning they're not going to be solved. I know that's really disheartening because that's more than half. And they're not going to be solved. They're going to be navigated. And oftentimes, we're like, why am I going to counseling if my problems aren't going to be solved? You're going to be given tools and resources to learn how to navigate these differences. Knowing that ahead of time and along the process can just be validating and helpful to know, okay, well, this is a perpetual issue. So when you're bringing up the perpetual issue, you're talking about a strategy that can help navigate. Maybe you just need to share your piece, your value that's coming up during that. Finally, the last question is, how can you be shown love this week? I believe that if this State of the Union from the Gottman method is practiced and mastered before the transition into parenthood, having this weekly dialogue, maybe not the first 2 weeks postpartum, because Lord knows how wide your eyes are going to be open because you're going to want to sleep so much. But maybe, week 3, week 4, and have grace with yourself. If you don't have the capacity to have the conversation, share that with your partner. But if this practice that was worked on before kids and then implemented after can be a really nice segue into checking in with the relationship. And we're not limited to these questions. Part of it, is creating this intimacy. I feel close with my partner when we have these conversations, but also, hey, how are you feeling? Tell me, what have you been anxious about? What's on your mental load? What's on your to-do list? Not in a way to problem solve and like, I'm going to fix everything. And like, oh, you're feeling, you're feeling down. Okay, let's go to Disneyland. I'm not looking for problems to be solved. Sometimes I'm just looking for a listening ear. And if I do need to problem solve, then yes, I will invite you into that. And I know that deviated a little bit from your question, but I hope that was, a helpful illustration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because what I think you're speaking to is what builds intimacy and connection and solidifies everything that it's going to require. Again, once this, I don't want to say tornado, but, there's an element of, again, the unexpected, what is coming to disrupt. And we don't mean disrupt in a negative, or at least I don't mean it in a negative way, but something that is going to disrupt life in many ways. And if those rhythms are there, those conversations have been solidified over time, if there's routine, if there's habits, if there's connection, intimacy, then you weather that storm a little differently with a lot more grace for yourself, for each other. And I think that's incredibly important. And perhaps coming back to then that question that you shared about, navigating those differences, how should couples then approach different views on parenting? Maybe you lean more towards tough love, and here you see more of a nurturing approach being, kind of the main vehicle that you want to drive in your parenting relationship. And how then can couples begin to navigate those discussions so that it doesn't end up being like either I win, you win, one's will is exerted over the other ultimately in this discussion?
Sure. Two things I want to mention with this question. One is it's not a competition, it's curiosity. When we have the curiosity, we're building that connectedness. And curiosity out of how were you parented? Taking an inventory on your childhood. What resonated with you? What did your parents do that really built you up? What did your parents do that you certainly want to do differently? So you want to have an understanding of what you went through in your early childhood experience and how that influenced your upbringing. You also want to understand your partners. Oftentimes we were parented very differently, perhaps in the same culture, perhaps not. Either way, there are differences and we need to discuss those differences. Sure, we can talk about what our goals are as parents to navigate that. And this is where I want to bring in one of my favorite authors, Dr. Philip Mamalakis, who is a fellow Orthodox psychologist. And he writes this beautiful book, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Parenting Toward the Kingdom. And he says something that really resonated with me. He said, when you're disciplining a child or, when you're, and I'm paraphrasing, when you're talking with your partner, you want to find out what is the goal. What is when I'm disciplining my child, what is the goal? Do I want to teach them delayed gratification? Do I want to teach them selflessness? Do I want to teach them self-control? What am I working towards? And discussing that dialogue and understanding that the working towards between you and your partner do not necessarily have to oppose each other. Okay? But outlining that instead of guessing.
Yep. And being intentional about those conversations and that being a shared responsibility between mom, between dad, that there's a sense of, again, what matters to you in this and getting to the heart of why that is important to you, and perhaps maybe even pivoting then to what do you think matters most then in those early days of parenting? Like, where should our investment, our time, and our energy, like, where should that? I mean, obviously, we want to keep this child alive. We want to take care of all the physical piece of the well-being, of taking care of an infant. But what do you think are the most important pieces then early on?
I think the answer to this question is going to vary based on the person answering it and what their own values are. So I will speak to it from my perspective. I believe the most important thing is making sure the parents are best taken care of. They are the ones taking care of this little one. We need to make sure they are taken care of. So if it's a village that you need to surround yourself with, if it's a night doula that you need to bring to watch baby so you could sleep at night, if it's meals that you have in the fridge, whatever it is that can best position the parents for success will ultimately be the most helpful for that family unit to thrive.
So really thinking about that support system early on. And I heard you earlier speak to asking for help, especially if that's not in your nature, that this is, I think, really also the beauty of the body of Christ, what it means to come together, to lean on family, on friends, on people within the church that want to offer support. Don't say no to the home cooked meal. Like, open your heart to where that help is and ask for it where there isn't. And that support, as I'm hearing you say, is recognizing the self-care element of this. So then, Christina, I'm curious what you would say then to a prospective parent who's feeling anxious or overwhelmed with the idea of preparing for parenthood, or maybe is like, at least for me now, like there's like a swirl of
Mhm.
information, of parenting methods, of books. Like it could be very easy, I think, to be
Mhm.
anxious, to be overwhelmed in that process. So what would you say to that perspective, a parent?
I would say, yeah, it is anxiety producing and it is overwhelming. So that means you're doing it right.
Yeah.
Um,
Because at least maybe you're thinking about it intentionally. Is that what I'm
yes.
hearing you say? Yeah.
Yeah. But also, there's so much unknown and
Mm.
so much responsibility that's about to come to your family that you don't know how to navigate. And that's okay. You're not expected to know everything. This is a learning curve. Your baby is learning how to navigate the world, and you are learning how to navigate parenting. So, honestly, let's invite some grace into the situation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Quite, that is, I feel very convicted by that. But once again, I would encourage these individuals to understand what their values are, and that will guide the different materials or resources that they gravitate toward.
Mm.
So, for example, if one of my values is to be very holistic and not gravitate toward any medication, so I'm going to have an unmedicated birth, meaning perhaps instead of an OB, I might have a midwife. Instead of giving birth at a hospital, I might explore my home. This is just one example of, having your values lead
Mm.
what you are going to be consuming.
Mhm.
I think once again, leaning into your support network, asking others, hey, what's been helpful for you?
Mm.
I know for me, I received a lot of support and material through one, my therapist guided me, have just me being able to have those conversations
Mhm.
and unfiltered, like, hey, I don't know what to expect. At my 6-week follow-up,
Mhm.
what do I do? What do I bring? What am I going to be asked?
Mhm.
And just having my therapist tell me, oh, this is this. Here you go. Kind of like a big sister that can guide me through some of this. So that's just a very real, practical example.
Mhm.
Um, Another resource that has been really helpful for me was New Mom School. So me knowing that I was going to go into a community, it's kind of like a mommy and me class
Mm.
that you go for 8 weeks. They talk about anxiety. They talk about the change of the relationship after baby. They talk about pelvic floor, which I had no idea about until after I gave birth.
All the fun surprises later on.
Surprise, here you go, your body's changing. And you're like,
Yeah.
I know, I just went through that for 9 months. Please, no more. And talked about infant bonding,
Mm.
things that I would have never even known which direction to look. But
Mm.
thankfully, my therapist shared this resource with me. I ended up
Mhm.
going to New Mom School. I'm still very good friends with many of these moms a year and a half later. But once again, identifying your values and looking for the resources that match those values.
Mhm.
One thing I want to mention, I know you're talking about parents to be. One book I wish that I had acquired before, my spiritual guide gave it to me after I gave birth when I was in the hospital, desperate, like, please pray over my son. I don't know if he's going to make it.
Yeah.
Thank God and praise God. But when Abuna came, we were talking about these 40 days that the woman takes at postpartum when she is not yet reintegrated into the church. And there's actually a book called The First 40 Days. It's an Orthodox book. I don't know if I got the title quite right, but it's a devotional for each day that walks you through and nourishes you. I'm not going to lie. Some days I could read a couple passages, and other days I could barely even remember what reading was. The point being, this is a resource that I think was also spiritual nourishment for me at a time where I didn't always feel connected with the church. And, it talks about churching the mother and the prayer that is prayed, during the baptism prayers and all of that. So I wish I would have received this.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say, Christina, is to be surrounded by the things that fill your cup, nourish your soul, whether that's actual resources, network of friends, of professional help, of spiritual help, all the things that bolster us up in that process, and what it means to not have to do this alone, which I think is so important and can feel hard to process in the moment unless we're maybe a little bit more intentional about that. beforehand. And so maybe as we wrap up our conversation today, I'm curious if you had to go back and give yourself one piece of advice before you had become a parent, like what would you have wanted to hear in your own words now that you would have needed to hear back then?
You're going to be a completely different person for the better, because the love that you are about to experience is going to be the greatest love of your life.
I love that. And what it means to let ourselves be transformed by that journey, like that there is something profound about that process of, we use the word sanctification often on this broadcast, but that really is it. Like family life, it's not just because we're giving something, it's because we are receiving first and foremost in our relationship with God. And I love that so much. And what I hope every parent is letting that resonate, or prospective parent is letting that resonate into their hearts. So thank you so much, Christina, for a really rich and wonderful conversation, a heartfelt conversation. So I thank you for your openness and vulnerability in that. I know it's touched my heart, and I hope it has touched yours. And as always, we pray for your family and pray that if you are on this journey or considering entering into the role of parenthood, that you would feel fortified by the church, by God, by the people surrounding you. And so please pray for us as we continue to pray for you. Thank you.